Hello, welcome back to the study of the book, Discovering Your True Self, a Guide for the Journey. In the first session of our study, in the first videotape, we talked about the true self and how it stands in contrast to the false self. The language I prefer to use is the constructed self. We talked about how the true self is who God created us to be, who God desires us to be, and who the Spirit of God is at work nurturing us to be. Whereas the constructed self is who the world told us we needed to be if we wanted to be accepted, if we wanted to be valued. In this videotape, we're going to focus on that constructed self. We're going to look at the components that go into the manufacture of this persona that out of which we live. If you please, we're going to dissect it in an attempt to understand it better. For the more we understand it, then the more we can recognize it in our lives, and the more we can consciously deal with it as the Spirit of God seeks to move us beyond the anxiety that drives the constructed self, as the Spirit of God seeks to grow us into the likeness of Christ and set the true self free. So, what are those building materials, if you please, that we use in the construction of this constructed or false self, this persona? What are the building materials? What are the components that go into the manufacture of the constructed self? Well, one of the primary components is the desire and the need to belong. We're going to talk more about that desire, that need in the next session, but belonging is one of those four basic emotional needs that have been created and woven into the very fabric of our emotional DNA. And the constructed self is rooted in this desire to belong, this need to be a part of a group, this need to be connected and to be valued within a group. And that is the second component. It is a relationship circle. It is a group to which we want to belong. Now, the earliest of those groups, obviously, when we were in the land of the giants, we'll talk more about that in next week's video as well. But in our formative years, that initial relationship circle was our family. Growing up, it was the kids in the neighborhood with whom we played. We went off to church, we went off to school, and those became relationship circles. And even within those circles, within our class, there were a smaller circle of relationships to which we wanted to belong. We joined the various groups and clubs like Scouts. Those each became a relationship circle to which we wanted to belong, in which we wanted to be connected and have a place and be valued. But the thing is that each one of those relationship circles carried a set of expectations. These were the norms that you had to measure up to, that you had to fit in with in order to belong in that group. Now, sometimes these norms were very clearly expressed. They were expressed as laws or rules or codes of conduct or morals that we had to follow. Sometimes they were simply values and that were unexpressed, but each group had this set of expectations by which it judged us and to which we had to conform. And that conformity then became another component that we used in manufacturing this constructed self. We conformed in order to fit in. We tried to live up to those norms and live out of those norms in order to belong within the group, in order to have a place within it. What we did not recognize, and maybe don't even recognize today, is that whole way of relating is what I call merit-based thinking. Merit-based thinking is if-then thinking. If we do this, then this will be the result. Living out of merit-based thinking creates transactional relationships in which we have to do something in order to gain something. And so in this desire to belong within this circle, what we did was to barter our conformity to the expectations and norms in order to be accepted, in order to belong, in order to have a place within that group. Because merit-based thinking always deals in rewards and punishments. If you conform to the norm, the reward is acceptance. You get to belong. You have a place within the group. But if you don't follow the norms, if you dare to violate the norms, then the punishment then is a criticalness against you. It is a judgment of you. And often in that judgment and condemnation, there is a rejection of you. And so you no longer get to belong in the group, or you're never accepted in the first place. You're looked down upon as strange and different because you don't conform. Rewards and punishment. And those rewards and punishment play on anxiety. This fear out of which we live, the fear of being left out, the fear of being rejected, the fear of not measuring up, the fear of having no value and being considered no good. And so that anxiety then drives us, and next week we'll look at anxiety as the driver behind this constructed self. We'll try to understand it more and where it comes from. So the rewards and punishment play upon this anxiety, this need to belong, and the fear that we will not belong, that we will be excluded, rejected, and left out. And then that creates an internal pressure that we view as social pressure. There is the internal pressure of the need and the fear. Then there's the external pressure of the group who says, if you will, then. Unless you do, then. So there's this social pressure with which we have to deal. And all of this, our focus is on others. Living in the land of the giants, in our formative years when we stood up and looked at the kneecaps of adults, the land of the giants, we were trained to do 4 things. We were trained to focus upon others, because those giants were the key to our safeness. Those giants were the key to us belonging and having a place and feeling safe within that place. And so we were trained to focus on others, but not just focus on others. The second thing is that we were trained to read their emotions. We were trained to read their emotional disposition, because if they were angry, then we were no longer safe. If they were happy, then we could be happy and we could be safe. A focus on others, training us to read the emotional disposition, which leads to the third thing. Because we were not able to think clearly, because the cerebral cortex was not developed completely at that point. In fact, it had only begun to develop. We learned to believe that we were responsible for that emotional disposition. We were responsible for the emotion that the giants were experiencing. And so out of that sense of responsibility, we learned to try to control. We tried to do things to keep from making the giants angry. We tried to do things that were an attempt to keep the giants happy or entertained and pleased with us. And in doing that, we were trained to do the fourth thing. We were trained to believe that our needs being met were dependent upon the giants. Now, these were just natural patterns that we developed. The problem is that as we become adults, we still live out of those 4 basic patterns. And it contributes, it is a major component in the manufacture of the constructed self, because we're always focusing upon others. We're focusing upon what they think and feel about us. We believe that if we do the right things, if we conform to the expectations, then we can control what they think about us, because our needs are dependent upon their acceptance. Our needs are dependent upon belonging. And so this focus upon others is a major component in the development and the manufacture of the constructed self. Now, all of this appeals to self-effort. This construction project is dependent upon us conforming. It is dependent upon self-effort. Our acceptance is determined by how well we measure up. And so we try hard to conform. We try hard to fit in. We try hard to be pleasing in ways that will bring us acceptance and belonging in the group. And it is all based upon self-effort. And the spirit out of which the constructed self lives is an ego-centric spirit. It is about me. When we live out of anxiety and fear, everything is about me. The egocentric spirit is focused on being afraid of being rejected or abandoned or left out. It is afraid of not measuring up, of being inadequate and flawed. It is afraid of not being valued and considered no good. It is afraid of being hurt. And so that anxiety keeps the focus on me, so that I attempt to control others in order to get my needs met. Now I trust that what I've described for you as I've dissected the constructed self, as I've identified all the components that we use in the manufacture of this constructed self, I trust that you can identify with all of those, that they sound very familiar. You've probably just never stopped to step back and take a look at them and see them all laid out there. But these are the factors behind the persona out of which we live. And just as we don't think about all of these factors, these components that we use to manufacture the constructed self, we probably have not stopped to consider the impact. When we put all of these components together, what do they produce beyond just the constructed self? The manufacture of the constructed self has some byproducts. It contributes to some very clear results, impacts, both in our lives as individuals as well as in our relationships and in the larger society. And so what we want to do now is to focus upon those byproducts, those consequences, those things that are the result of living out of the constructed self. The constructed self produces an ego-based identity. It is an identity, a sense of self that is tied to accomplishments. It is tied to measuring up. This is an identity that is based upon what the world says is successful and the world's measure of success and how well we live up to and measure up to that standard of what the world society says success is. So it becomes an ego-based identity, an identity that's based upon what I have achieved and what I have accomplished. And often that ego-based identity is accompanied by an independent, self-reliant spirit. Now, there's nothing wrong with being strong and self-reliant until it's taken to the extreme. the ego-based identity of the constructed self produces this independent, self-reliant spirit. It overlooks the interrelatedness of all of life. It overlooks the contributions that others have made to our success and our achievements. It also overlooks the fact that we need each other today. And so this independent, self-reliant spirit is often expressed in the term pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And it has a tendency to block compassion within us, so that when we look at others, we don't look at them through the lenses of compassion. We look at them through the lenses of expectations. Why don't they pull themselves up? We did. Why don't they do something to change their situation? You see, this independent, self-reliant spirit blocks our ability to respond to others and to help others in their journey as they're trying to make a go of life. But the constructed self, this ego-based identity, always has a shadow. The shadow side is that part of us that we don't want to be brought into the light. We don't want other people to see it. The shadow is the realm in which we hide those parts of ourselves that we judge as weak or unacceptable. Those things that we believe society would not approve of and would condemn and judge and shame. And so the shadow is all of those parts of ourselves that we try to push out of our awareness. Those parts of ourselves that we want to live in denial of. Sometimes we go so far as to live by disowning these parts of ourselves. But the shadow is always a realm of fear. It is fear of being found out. It is the fear of being exposed. It is the fear of what people would think if they knew what we were really like deep inside. And the shadow is the realm of shame. The shame with which we live. The shame that out of which we believe, the fear that we believe that we are not lovable. That we are inadequate and flawed. That we are less than others. That we are no good. And so we deserve to be hurt. The ego-based identity of the constructed self always has the flip side, the shadow side. And that shadow side is the place of our emotional reactivity. Our emotional reactivity is simply those parts of our lives that are sensitive to others' touch. When we get too close, when someone gets too close to our fear of being rejected and left out and unloved, or our fear of being inadequate and flawed and not measuring up, or our fear of not being valued, of being less than, our fear of being hurt. When something gets too close to that and touches it, it creates this emotional reaction within us in which we fight back and push back. These are our buttons. These are our triggers. These are those things that set us off, because the shadow side is always expressed then in reactivity. Another byproduct and contributor to the constructed self is us them thinking. Us them thinking is where we divide the world into those like us and those who are different from us. It's a natural product of meeting the expectation so that we can be accepted in this circle of friends. You see that circle of relationships are the insiders and everybody else are the outsiders. And so we create this us-them way of thinking and way of living in the world. And that us-them thinking always is accompanied with a comparing. We have to compare ourselves with others. And always when we compare, we always end up judging ourselves as better than and the other as less than. And so this us-them thinking creates and fosters better than, less than thinking. Us-them says who's right and who's wrong as we compare. And as we compare, we always come out that we're the ones who are right. And those other people are the ones who are wrong. After all, we're the ones who conform to the norms, and they didn't conform to the norms. And so that means we're the ones who are in the right. They're the ones who are in the wrong. And so that makes us better than them. The others are always one step below us. Better than, less than thinking. And this kind of thinking is rooted in either or thinking. Either or thinking is black and white thinking. It has to be one or the other. We have to be right and them wrong. Or if they're right, that makes us wrong. This either or thinking is there can only be one winner. And it operates out of the mentality, out of the assumption that because we're right, we have the whole truth, and they're wrong and they can't have any insights. It neglects the reality that truth is always larger than our understanding of it. There's always another dimension, another perspective out of which we live. And so this either or black and white thinking creates within us an I'm right and you're wrong mentality. And it creates this rigidness in our thinking in which we defend what we believe as the only right way to believe. It ignores the nuances that are a part of any issue. It creates a rigidity in thinking that makes it difficult to learn, that makes it difficult to grow. And so this rigidity of thinking, I'm right, you're wrong mentality, is always producing scapegoats. Scapegoating is simply that practice we have of looking at others and judging them, saying we're not like them, so we're better than them and they're less than them. And the problem is that they just don't have the motivation, or they just don't have the strength that it takes to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Scapegoating is a way of propping up our ego-based identity, which is always a fragile identity. Propping it up at somebody else's expense. Because we deem them less than, that makes us better than. Because we deem them wrong, that makes us right. And so we can feel good about ourselves at someone else's expense. We all have these individuals in our lives that we scapegoat. Just think about the people that we're critical of and that we judge and we speak negatively of. And society has these scapegoats as well. Those portions of our population that we deem as the other, and the other is the problem, and they're responsible for fixing the problem because they carry the blame for it. The ego-based identity, not being in touch with its own shadow and its own weaknesses and struggles, lives out of a self-reliant spirit that looks down on others as less than and scapegoats them as the problem. And out of this us, them, better than, less than, either or thinking I'm right, you're wrong mentality comes an inequality. There's inequality in the world. Not everyone is valued the same. Although all are human beings created in the likeness of God, in the image of God, we deem some people as better than and less than. We deem some people as having more value than others, more standing than others. And there's an inequality in the way we view them and we treat them. Even within those relationship circles that we strive so hard to gain acceptance in, there's an inequality there. There's some people who are valued more than others. And inequality is a natural dimension of the constructed self-life. But on a more personal level, those are more social levels, societal levels. On a more personal level, the constructed self produces superficial relationships. Because of the shadow, because of those things that we hide, we don't want people to know. We tend to keep people at arm's length. We don't let people get close to us. We don't let people get close enough to really know us, because we're afraid if they really knew us, they wouldn't like us, they would reject us, they would judge us, or maybe even go so far as to ridicule us. And so we find bridges by which we live in relationship. We look for those things that we have in common, and those things that we have in common then become the bridge by which we connect with one another, and we interact with each other without ever revealing or being vulnerable with the other. Superficial relationships. And those superficial relationships